Reno, famous as the biggest little city in the world. Bustling metropolis in an atmosphere of free and easy Western living.
Where the doors are open around the clock. And night and day, the little city sings with activity. Reno, Nevada, a fabulous town.
I couldn't agree more. Reno is a fabulous town with a rich and colorful history. Because the history of Reno is intertwined with the history of the Central Pacific Railroad. And people have been riding those rails to Reno ever since the first train rolled through in 1869.
On the train for Reno.
On the train for Reno.
I might as well come too on a train bound for Reno.
Because that's the last train to Reno.
Reno? Reno, my hat.
It's hard to believe, but Reno was not the Central Pacific's first choice to receive their new Virginia train station. In fact, it wasn't even their second choice. And if we're going to be honest, not even their third. In fact, it wasn't even a choice at all. No, that dubious honor went to the town of Glendale. After all, Glendale was the most obvious choice. The long-established town was the largest in the Truckee Meadows. Lake's Crossing, on the other hand, well, Lake's Crossing was no more than a rickety old bridge and a run-down way station.
And the area was known as Lake's Crossing, after Myron Lake, the gentleman who owned the toll bridge and franchise, which he had acquired from Charles Fuller in 1862.
Unfortunately for Myron Lake, the next 6 years wouldn't be any easier for him than the previous 18 months had been for Charles Fuller.
Charles Fuller did not do very well at Lake's Crossing. He was plagued by hard winters, no money, the river constantly flooding, and he even ended up losing his bridge in the Great Flood of 1862.
It really wouldn't have mattered how bad Bill wanted to keep Fuller's Crossing. He was out of options. He had no money. He had just lost his Utah toll franchise. His bridge completely obliterated in the flood. So when Myron Lake came down from Honey Lake Valley ready to make a deal, Bill was more than ready to take him up on it. And what was that deal, you ask? Well, part of the Fuller family farm, which Lake had acquired after the Fuller family fell upon hard times, in exchange for all of Fuller's Crossing, including the entire portion of the Sierra Valley Toll Road, today's Virginia Street. So just a short 18 months after he started his franchise, Bill Fuller left it all behind, went back to Honey Lake in an attempt to restore his family's legacy and farm. And the area quickly became known as Lake's Crossing.
Myron Lake built a much sturdier bridge after the flood of 62 had washed out Fuller's wooden bridge. He built a solid wood structure right here where we're standing and was granted a official toll franchise from the state of Nevada. And he was granted this monopoly for 10 years. And not only that, there wasn't anyone allowed to even build another road or bridge within a mile either direction of his road and bridge.
Now, one would think that this would have given him the lockdown on a small fortune. But these early years were tough for Myron Lake. The heavy wagons preferred to go 5 miles west to Hunter's Crossing, and everybody else preferred to go 5 miles east to Stone and Gate's free bridge. That left very little traffic to come over the Sierra Valley Toll Road. Luckily for Lake, that old Comstock was about to hit again, and it would bring a whole new rush to Washoe. So Lake set out to expand his crossing. He made much needed improvements to the way station that Charles Fuller had built, which now had a tavern, a store, a restaurant, and even a post office. And known as a tyrant and a bully, Lake brought down his wife Jane and 3 stepkids from Honey Lake Valley, basically so he could have a built-in slave labor system, as he worked them around the clock, taking care of his many patrons, while he himself spent the evenings bartending and generally just having a good time in the tavern. Everything was about to change because the Central Pacific was punching its way through the Sierras, and it was about to turn the Truckee Meadows on its side. Everybody was excited about the new train station that was going to be at Glendale.
Americans have dreamt of the moment when the whole nation will be linked together by rail from east to west. Now at last, the railroads will try to push across the whole country right to the Pacific. There will be a race to see who lays more track, for the prize is land and money. To each company, the government will give 20 square miles of public lands for each mile of track they lay. They will own all the oil, coal, timber, gold, or other minerals to be found in these lands. Little wonder they drive the men at breakneck speed.
Basically, one of the ways the Central Pacific was paid was via land grants. They would receive 20 acres of land per every 1 mile of track that they laid. Now, right now you're thinking, holy crap, Harmony, that's a lot of land. And you're right, that is a crap ton of land. But don't worry, the government had a plan. Instead of just letting the Central Pacific have a complete monopoly on an area, they granted this land in alternating sections in choice locations on both sides of the track, which ended up creating a checkerboard pattern on a map. Okay, now pay attention to this part because it's going to be important. This land was pre-reserved based on the original survey routes, which in the case of Reno, put the tracks firmly on the south side of the river to Glendale. Now, here's the problem. When the man from the railroad came through to discuss his plans for the new train station, Glendale was under 3 feet of water as the Truckee River had just flooded. And the man from the railroad said there's no way they could put a train in a flood zone, which meant that the tracks had to be rerouted to the north of the river at the last minute. This created quite a problem for the Central Pacific, as all their pre-reserved land was on the south side. And the north side of the river, the land was all taken. One, by the Washoe Consolidated Gold and Silver Mining Company, aka the Auburn Mill. And two, by one Mr. Myron Lake, who had 103 choice acres right on the north side of the river. This is when a mutually beneficial deal was made between the Central Pacific and Myron Lake, where Myron Lake would deed his 107 acres on the north side of the river to the Central Pacific in exchange for their pre-reserved south side acres, along with the promise that he would get the new Virginia train station. The first portion of this deal took place on March 27th, 1868, when the two gentlemen sat down to lay out a new town.
The spot looks very different than it did in Charles Fuller's day. In Charles Fuller's day, there was nothing here, and I mean absolutely nothing. In fact, until the Central Pacific came through in 1868, there remained nothing. The only 3 buildings that sat in Reno were the Riverside Hotel right here, Myron Lake's house, which is right here where the courthouse stands, and he had built a grist mill, which is approximately right here. When the Central Pacific came through in 1868, they decided to auction off Reno. They subdivided the area into lots and held a grand auction where some of the lots went as high as $1,000. And they had that auction right here where we're standing.
After this, things went quick, like real quick. And on one busy day in May 9th to be exact, the little area known as Lakes Crossing was packed with over 1,000 land-seeking hopefuls. Lakes Hotel, the only one in town, was at maximum capacity. There were people sleeping along the river, in the sagebrush, in the streets. Everyone wanted a piece of the new town. As the auction began, the very first lot sold in what would become Reno was the east corner of Commercial Row and Virginia Street. It was a 25 by 100 foot section, which sold for $550. And after that, it was on. Some lots went as high as $1,000. And when it was all said and done, the auction had been a success. Myron Lake and the Central Pacific had done it. They created a town.
Reno was founded in 1868, named after General Jesse Lee Reno, a Union hero of the Civil War.
Just a short 40 days later, the Central Pacific would finally lay its tracks through Reno, and Reno would be propelled on a course of infamy. But it would have never become the biggest little city in the world if it weren't for those pioneers such as Charles Fuller and the vision of Myron Lake and the Central Pacific.
Where does it get you?
On the train for Reno.
On the train for Reno. Well, let's all have another little drinky. To Reno, the biggest little city in the world, American cradle of liberty.
Reno, beautiful emblem of the Great Divide.
To Reno.